achieve intimacy. Yes.
Do you ever find like maybe a dysfunctional situation where whatever the other party just sort of puts up with, you know, just kind of goes along with, is a little bit of a doormat? I mean, I have to even look at Casey Anthony's parents and go, what is it with them? You know? I mean, if he's looking at, if you know, he's having these affairs supposedly, and she's just kind of going along with the ride, and you know, I don't know. It's, you know, so I do understand, you know, that it talks about these people just flip from one relationship to the other, and I think the other thing that it talks about is how, you know, you talk about how many of them don't have anything to do with their spouses or children unless they have something they gain from it. They're like a possession. If you can bring something to me or give me something that being in relationship with you can give me, then, you know, then I'll be in your life.
Exactly. People are objects.
They're objects. They're like the car or the computer or the new cell phone they just got. You know, if there's something to be gained by that, you know, and even with their own children, they're like that. And so, well, we're going to head into another break. We're going to stay on here with Richard Burnett talking about sociopathy and just a rich history of experience that he's had with it. You're here listening to Joan on the Joan Jerkovich Show, 910 KINA. And just a tiny bit short on that. And we'll catch that on the edit.
I'm sorry about the bullshit.
Well, you just said it again.
I don't want you to get
I didn't even mention,
trouble with the FCC or something.
Yeah, let me kind of look at my notes because we're just doing a little.
That you can't say.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I didn't even mention that here, but was that a congressman you said?
Yes, it was a representative from Connecticut. And the psychiatrist's name was Masterson. I can't think of his first name. But he wrote a book called The Borderline Adolescent. He was considered the world's authority on the borderline person. And he just said it was bullshit. He looked at the phone and said it's bullshit.
Yeah, that any of that about the
borderline.
The borderline.
As far as adolescents go, yes. But he did refer me to an inpatient facility in White Plains, New York, and that had a good reputation. And he said, you know, that should make the congressman happy. And it did. They sent their daughter.
So he just wanted a referral at some point, yeah. Okay.
You know, there's a retired dentist in town whose son raped a girl.
Oh.
And we were over at their house maybe 3 or 4 months. And this guy does a lot of good things in the community. I mean, he's extremely bright, but he does it because it's the right thing to do. I don't know that he really feels
the
about
feeling of,
And we're talking about this, and his son was a good-looking kid, you know, crazy thing. And he looked at my wife and I, and he said, well, she should have never got in the car.
Oh, that sounds like a sociopath's response. It's her fault. She got in the car, and I had to rape her.
Bingo, yeah. Wow.
I know, I've been doing enough, and that's another thing that I come in with, you know, is how many of these turn it around that they're the victim. And let's go ahead and get back and open up with that, because that is a really fascinating piece.
But I can't speak, I don't want to speak about
No, not about that, just the generalities, right. So
it was in the newspapers and everything,
we're
so
back to
somebody
another,
could look them up.
Yeah, another 10, right? And then we'll go down to 5. Let me get a little drink. You ready? Yep. Well, we're back, and this is Joan with the Joan Jerkovich Show, talking with Richard Burnett about sociopathy. And one of the things we were just kind of talking with on break, and if you want to go to joanjerkovich.com and watch some of the video outtakes, we're talking about, you know, how some of the sociopaths turn their destructive behaviors into, I'm the poor victim here.
Feel sorry for me.
Yeah, they turn a whole story of hurting someone else around to, look at me, I'm the victim. We were talking about a situation where there was, you know, someone who said, well, you know, she shouldn't have gotten in my car, you know, and of course then there was an assault and all of that from there. It wasn't their fault, their responsibility that they hurt this person. It was the person's fault for getting in the car.
Just as Casey Anthony said, you know, she was sexually abused by her father. So this, I don't know whether she was or not, but she appeared to be the victim. That's the way the defense presented the case.
Right, and that also fits exactly under one of those checklists called lack of remorse or guilt. They change the story to make themselves a victim. Talk about, you know, how they don't care, they hurt others, they don't have any feeling about them causing pain. They don't apologize unless it's for appearance's sake. What about that? You know, do you ever run into them apologizing? Or is it always, well, it wasn't my fault?
I don't know that they're capable of a truthful apology because they don't have the ability to get inside the other person and be empathic. So I don't know that they can give a true apology. I do domestic violence assessments. Our program in Junction City is certified by the State Attorney General's office. And one of the questions on the form that the Attorney General puts out to ask the perpetrator is, when is the last time you apologized to your wife and what was the conditions of that apology? And some people really, it's obvious they have apologized and they do understand the hurt that they caused in that particular instance. They apologize. But some people say, well, I've never apologized. Or, yeah, I told her it was okay and she should get over it.
Yeah, I could see that. I could say, you know, yeah, what's her problem? You know, that kind of thing. And so they just can't give an apology. And even if they did, it wouldn't be insincere because they don't feel it.
Right.
They don't feel that. And so there's just so much, you know, of, you know, and there was one thing that talked a little bit about the physiology of this that I was reading, where when they actually set people up to EEGs and check the brain patterns, that a sociopath would sometimes have the same brain pattern as an adolescent, even adult sociopath. So it's almost like a delayed brain development. And a lot of them almost at, you know, 30 or 40 years of age kind of say, you know, kind of are almost like they're immature. It's almost like, well, I always did that when I was 12 years old, so why can't I do it now? You know, well, you're a 30, 40-year-old professional. You know, have you seen that?
There is some professional literature that suggests that conscience is located towards the back of our head in the brain, and some people have more developed back of the head brain material, and some people have less. And that may be the nature part of this whole discussion.
Exactly, the biology part of it, right. Another one of the checklist is shallow emotions. What do you see about that? Just a completely limited depth of feeling, but they can oftentimes play act feelings. It's almost like they can play act that they're affected by something if it again gains them something or in some way manipulates someone. Have you seen that?
I've seen a number of soldiers, and I'm not sure whether it's because of their training or because of the horror that they've experienced in war. They come home from combat, and they're basically their wives are saying he doesn't talk. You know, he goes through the motions, he lives his day, he's a good soldier, you know, he's a good provider, he pats the kids on the head, but the wife feels she's living with a shell. And I know you also work with PTSD, which is a segment we're hoping to bring, you know, to the show here in the near future. But you're not saying that's necessarily sociopathy, or you think it's more their training? It's more their training. There's a great book called Lethal Warrior about the Band of Brothers Battalion, and a general did a study on soldiers in the South Pacific during World War II and found that only 20% of the soldiers shot their weapons in combat, which means 80% didn't. But 80% thought they don't want to kill anyone. And so the Army went to work, and in the late 80s, early 90s, all soldiers are now trained in something called reflexive fire, which allows them to instantaneously fire their weapon when something unusual happens. adolescents, and it's a training they go through. Psychologists help to develop that program. And so people who are in that training, and then they use that training, and then they come back, how do I get out of that training?
Right, exactly. You know, like I said, we want to do a whole show on that because there are so many elements to PTSD and what switching from being a soldier to being a civilian to being a father again, a husband again, and you know, it's really affecting a lot of people, as we know. And you know, we talk about the sociopathy, you know, and shallow emotions, you know, they can turn on a dime. You know, they can turn on a dime. And it was interesting to read that they can be viciously angry, attacking or brutalizing someone, even verbally, 1 minute, and turn over here to someone who maybe walks in the room and go, oh, hi, you know, how are you, you know? And just 1 minute, you know, be so vicious with their emotions, but then real sweet and charming or jovial the next.
In the next instant.
And, yeah.
Yes.
It's
So
like, or they can describe some horrific thing they did to an animal or to a person with just, like, you know.
Objectivity.
Which is like, you know, it's like you're talking about doing this to a person, like you're carving the Thanksgiving turkey. I mean, and that's just hard for me to wrap my head around. You know, what do you say about that? How do we normal people, if we want to call ourselves that?
I would say lock people up like that.
And you believe lock them up forever?
Yes, people who are like, and they do, they wind up with
do.
life sentences at some point, or
many of those.
As in the OJ trial, he got off apparently, but they kept after him, and he's in jail now.
And that's actually one of the things that I kind of said. If you go to salinapost.com, you'll see my blogs coming up, and I said that about Casey Anthony. The verdict might still be out. Because what's your opinion of this, Richard? Do you think that if she's a true sociopath, she will offend in some way again?
She'll get into trouble again,
right.
Yes, if she is. Yes.
Now, we may not necessarily, like OJ, as far as we know, hasn't gone out and murdered anyone, but he got into other legal problems. So we think that could be the case with Casey Anthony. That might be what I call the final verdict.
I would predict that.
You do actually predict that?
Yes, I would predict that.
And so, again, it might not be, you know, like we said, something so horrific that, you know, might happen. But, so in some ways, if you're thinking that, you know, this is predictable, are these people somewhat predictable within the disease or the syndrome of sociopathy?
They're predictable in that in the long run they will eventually trip themselves up, because the narcissism says to themselves, you know, I can do what I want, I can do anything. Look, I've proven it, so I'll continue on this path, and eventually they trip themselves up.
So what is it about the narcissistic people that trip them up? Tell us a little more about narcissism, because that is apparently a key element of this.
It's that 2-year-old child who's the center of the universe, and I can do what I want, and I can have what I want, and therefore it doesn't matter what you want.
Right. Doesn't matter if I'm hurting you, I'll take what I want, you know, but it doesn't matter if it hurts you or hurts other people, but it's all about me. Me.
Yes.
And does that also then send those people almost to where, in some strange way, they like that limelight? Have you ever seen, like, a Ted Bundy? You know, it's almost like he seemed to enjoy, you know, the limelight of being caught. Oh, BTK was the worst.
Right.
Didn't he love, you know, standing there talking about all of his crimes and just very dispassionately, but he was like, you know, on a movie set? That was very hard for me to stomach. Do you remember, did you see that footage?
Yes, oh yes, down in Wichita, yes, all the time. And that man was such a nice person in the community.
Exactly.
You know, a little over, he did something with, you know, if your grass was too long, he could come and give you a ticket. And I guess he overdid that a little bit, but otherwise people thought he was a nice guy and a very private person who didn't bother anyone. But he enjoyed reading about himself in the newspaper.
Exactly. And we might come back to that. We're going to take another break, but I think we might come back to some more about BTK, especially since he's so close to us here in Kansas. And you're listening to Joan with the Joan Jerkovich Show, Saturdays at 9 a.m., 910 KINA. That guy scares me. I mean,
well,
it's just...
he's in jail.
Oh,
He's
yeah.
not going to get out.
But